truth about Ukraine. Kiev as a pawn of the Great Reset in the downfall of Europe. Europe is undergoing destruction. The attack on Poland revealed the great panic that Kiev and the West have, the first because of the consequences of the Chinese martyrdom following by Russia's attack strategy in the West, because it sees that the pawn, quote unquote, in its game in the region, Ukraine, is not succeeding in her goal. The war in Ukraine has not started yet. What the country is living before the eyes of the world is the preparation of a Russian attack against Ukraine and its Western allies, who are implementing, with the bloody contribution of Kiev, the big picture, the economic collapse of Europe through energy strangulation and deindustrialization. So the real war begins soon. The destruction in that way. The attack in Poland brought to light a ridiculous cover-up, as described by Brazilian geopolitical analyst Pepe Escobar. In his analysis, due to the consequences of the Chinese martyrdom followed by Russia's attack strategy in the West, because it sees that the pawn in its game is in the region, Ukraine, does not achieve its goal. The reason for the strike in Poland and panic. The Anglo-American purpose of this attack was to create a world crisis against Russia. But it failed and it was exposed. This does not mean that they will not try again and soon, as the analyst points out. The main reason is panic, because Western intelligence services see Moscow finally mobilizing its military, ready to hit the ground running next month, while striking key targets, Ukraine's electricity infrastructure, as a form of Chinese torture. Those February days when only 100,000 troops were sent in, and the DPR and LPR militias, as well as Wagner's commandos and Kadyrov's Chechens doing most of the heavy lifting, quote unquote, are long gone. In total, Russians and Russian-speaking faced hordes of Ukrainian troops, perhaps as many as 1 million. The miracle, quote unquote, is that the Russians did very well and they created a panic. Every military analyst knows the basic rule. An invading force must outnumber the defending force 3 times. The Russian army at the beginning of Special Military Operation SMO listed a small representation of the real forces. The Russian armed forces arguably have a standing army of 1.3 million soldiers. Surely they could have saved a few tens of thousands more than the original 100,000, but they did not. It was a political decision. But now the SMO is over. What is now taking place is a CTO, counter-terrorist operation. A sequence of terrorist attacks targeting the Nord Streams, the Crimean Bridge, the Black Sea Fleet, finally demonstrated that inevitably of going beyond a simple military operation, and that brings us to the electric war, as the analyst calls the paralysis of Ukraine's electrical grid by the Russians, or de-electrification of Ukraine. So this is the de-electrification of Ukraine. Electric war is essentially being treated as a tactic, leading to the eventual imposition of Russian terms on a potential armistice, which neither Anglo-American intelligence nor NATO wants. Even if there was an armistice, which has been widely touted for several weeks, it would not end the war. Because the deeper implicit Russian terms, an end to NATO expansion and a security divide, were fully spelled out in both Washington and Brussels last December, and they were then rejected, as nothing conceptually has changed since then. Coupled with the Western arming of Ukraine in a frenzy, the Putin-era Stavka could only expand on the original SMO mandate, which remains denazification and demilitarization. However, now the mandate should include Kiev and Lviv, which are the west part of Ukraine. And that starts with the current de-electrification campaign, which goes well beyond the east of the Dnieper and along the Black Sea coast of Odessa. That's why most of Ukraine is in the dark. They say 50% of Ukraine has no electricity. This brings us to the key issue of the scope and depth of the electric war in terms of establishing a DMZ, complete without land, west of the Dnieper to protect Russian areas from NATO artillery, HIMARS, and missile attacks. How deep? 100 kilometers. No, probably 300 kilometers, as Kiev has already requested artillery with that kind of range. What is crucial is that in July, this had already been extensively discussed in Moscow at the highest levels. Sergei Lavrov spikes. In a lengthy interview in July, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia let the cat diplomatically out of the bag. The whole truth about the Ukrainian war. The process continues consistently and persistently. It will continue as long as the West, desperate to make the situation as bad as possible, continues to flood Ukraine with more and more long-range weapons. Take the HIMARS. Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov boasts that they have already received long-range ammunition 300 kilometers. This means that our geographical targets will go even further than the current line. We cannot allow the part of Ukraine controlled by Vladimir Zelensky or whoever replaces him to have weapons that pose a direct threat to our territory or to the republics that have declared their independence and want to determine their future. The implications are clear. While Washington and NATO are even more desperate to make the situation as bad as possible, and this is plan A, there is no plan B. Geoeconomically, the Americans are stepping up the new great game, the new great game. Desperation here applies to the effort controlling energy corridors and determining their price. Russia remains uninvolved as it continues to invest in pipelinization to Asia, consolidate the multimodal international north-south transport corridor, INTSC, with India and Iran as key partners, and determine the price of energy through OPEC. A paradise for oligarch looters. The West will not back down because they don't want to, nor can they afford to lose another NATO war against the existential threat, as they call Russia. The destruction of Europe. As the news from the battlefields of Ukraine promises to be even bleaker under General Winter, quote-unquote, the green transition, served courtesy of Silicon Valley, continues to be a side dish offered with the main course, the great narrative of Davos, formerly the Great Reset, which reared its head at the G20 in Bali, since it translated that everything is going well with the Destroy Europe project. Deindustrialize and be happy with the blessings of renewables at the altar of European values. A quick look back to determine the context we are in as always helpful. Ukraine was part of Russia for almost 4 centuries. The very idea of its independence was invented in Austria during World War I in order to undermine the Russian army, and it did. The present independence was created so that local troikists, oligarchs, could loot the nation, as a government aligned with Russia was to move against these oligarchs. In 2014, Kiev coup was essentially engineered by Zbigniew Brzezinski of the Great Chessboard to drag Russia into a new guerrilla war, as in Afghanistan, followed by orders to the Gulf oil oligarchs to crash the price of oil. Moscow had to protect Russian-speaking speakers in Crimea and Donbass, and this led to more Western sanctions. Everything was very nicely set up. For 8 years, Moscow refused to send its armies even to the Donbass east of the Dnieper, historically part of Mother Russia. The reason? Not to get bogged down in another partisan war. The rest of Ukraine, meanwhile, was looted by Western-backed oligarchs and sunk into an economic black hole. The collective West was deliberately chosen not to fund the black hole. Most of the IMF injections were simply stolen by the oligarchs of Ukraine, and the spoils were taken out of the country. These oligarch looters were, of course, protected by the usual suspects. It's always important to remember that between 1991 and 1999, The equivalent of today's household wealth in Russia was stolen and moved abroad, mostly to London. Now the same usual suspects are trying to destroy Russia with sanctions, as the new Hitler Putin has stopped the looting. The difference is that the plan to use Ukraine as a mere pawn in their game is not working. On the ground, what's happening so far is mostly skirmishes and some actual fighting, but with Moscow massing new troops for a winter offensive, the Ukrainian military may end up completely defeated. Russia is not doing so badly, considering the effectiveness of its artillery strikes against Ukrainian strongholds, recent planned retreats, or positioned warfare, keeping casualties low while crushing Ukrainian firepower. The collective West believes it holds Ukraine's proxy war card. Russia is betting on reality, where the economic cards are food, energy, resources, resource security, and a stable economy. Meanwhile, like if the EU energy suicide didn't have to face a pyramid of tests, they can surely expect at least 15 million desperate Ukrainians fleeing villages and towns with zero electricity to knock on their door of the European nations. The train station in temporarily occupied Kherson is a graphic example. People constantly show up to warm up and charge their smartphones. The town has no electricity, no heating, and no water. Current Russian tactics are the complete opposite of the military theory of concentrated power developed by Napoleon. This is why Russia is accumulating serious advantages while stirring up dust in a bowl of rose petals. And of course, we have not even started yet. Winter is coming. This is from Banking News Greece. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.